comes in and out a little bit.
All right, we're gonna give this a shot, guys. We'll see how the connection goes. But been a couple of months. Uh, Last time we were international. This time we're staying a little bit closer to home. Um, Today we are gonna have a conversation with the the man, the myth, the legend that is Jay Fuhrer. It's gone by numerous aliases over the year, from uh, Waterway King. I found that out earlier this month. That was the alias that he was going at one point, and more recently, he's been known as the Pope of Soil Health. I think that's a little better. I think that's a little better alias to go by. But I'll let Jay just introduce himself a little bit for those of you that don't know him. Um, but if you don't know him after this conversation, there's plenty of content out there on YouTube, podcasts. So with that, Jay, let you introduce yourself.
Well, I'm Jay Fear. I have had a number of different titles. I prefer conservationist because I think it represents my interests and my career. I did spend 40 years with USDA, NRCS, in various positions, but I think conservationist represents it's the term I like. I tried to real hard to lose the waterway king or the construction person real title real. I tried real hard to lose that because that was early on in terms of trying to treat symptoms, and so I treated symptoms for a number of years in the northern plains in terms of whether it was waterways or diversions and those type things to try to control or keep water on the cropland itself, because our issue was we weren't able to when it did rain an inch, we didn't get an inch, and so if it rained an inch, we would lose so much of that water and it would run off. And of course, what we had done over time, and this was a learning process, but what we had done over time was we had taken the structure out of our soils. And so consequently, they would microscopically slake the pores shut. And then it didn't matter how much it rained after that, you're going to probably lose the majority of it. And so we had a scenario going where we would treat the symptoms because we had such erosion issues at the time. And once you take the structure out of the soil, it's difficult to be able to resist wind or water erosion. It was our nemesis, certainly in the 80s. So I started 1980, and we were looking at a situation, I think, with cropping that if you had the right situation, adequate rainfall, all these things, you're going to come out of this with some kind of, I think, economical yield, if you will. But we had rather limited diversity, limited crop diversity. Uh, uh, Cover crops were not used by anyone because I think, and myself included, the first time I looked at a cover crop, I said to myself, well, why would we use our limited water and resources and nutrients and time and equipment on something like this? And so I had to get my head wrapped around plant physiology, and I think it was looking at plant physiology and plant function that helped me understand that if we don't have a green plant, we can't bring carbon in the soil. And so if you're not going to bring the energy of photosynthesis into the soil, you're not going to be able to have this connection of a food supply, um, and the connection between the plant and the biology and the food supply for the biology in terms of carbon. And if you don't have that, you can't achieve the soil function. You can't achieve soil aggregates. You don't have soil aggregates, you don't have rainfall infiltration, you don't have air movement, you don't have biology movement. it just alters everything because we have aerobic systems. And if they're going to be aerobic systems, we have to allow air and water, and we have to have life sustaining features like that in our soils. So that was a real learning process for me because what I knew in the 80s, Tyrell, about carbon, uh, I'm sure I could have wrote that out in one or two sentences. And and um, and what I knew about a cover crop was even less. And it took me a while to get my head wrapped around that. And then I think too, if we're honest, many times when we achieve something, um, you did it by standing on somebody else's shoulders, and you did it by helping up, if you will, from others that had figured out maybe a piece of the pie. So they had figured out something that worked, and we're willing to share that information. And so I went down a road, I guess, on soil function and plant physiology and ultimately carbon and all these features. And I'd like to say I just picked up a book and read about it, and that was good. After I was finished reading that book, I was ready to be a much better conservationist. But life isn't quite like that usually, and so it's usually more of a learning process, I think. And so what I did, I started to self-educate. Uh, I think an employer like in my case, like NRCS or any other employer that you work for, they can get you to maybe a certain point or a certain level. But then I think you got to take that on yourself, and I think that then becomes part of continuing education, continuing improvement. And I think if you're in the right line of work and you enjoy whatever item you're working on, then it becomes really interesting. And so I can kind of give you some early examples if you like, but but um, there was a number of different people in different areas of agriculture, and I did something really pretty simple and straightforward. I would contact them and I would ask them, "Would you teach me? Would you teach me about whether it was a cover crop or whether it was about carbon or whether it was about soil function, dynamic soil properties?" I spent a lot of time with soil scientists, and they thought I was just their friend, but actually I was trying to gain knowledge from them and 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 learn about dynamic soil properties, because the reason I was interested in the dynamic soil properties was because these are things you can impact with your management. And I think when you start putting those together, I think that's when you start to think in terms of maybe more of a systems approach. Maybe more of I need more than just one tool here. I'm
Mhm.
going to need, because nature is very dynamic and extremely complex. It's not simple. It's never simple. It's humans who the human race likes to simplify something, and I
Mhm.
get that to a degree. I mean, I'll even find myself doing that from time to time, but nature's not like that, and so it's very complex, and especially when you get into plants and plant physiology and thousands of metabolites that a plant can produce, different plants. And so you start to get maybe to more of an appreciation. And so I'll give you an example. Different people, different times of my career, but probably when I think in terms of the 80s, it was probably Ellen Savory made a real impact on me. I took his course in 1986, right here in Bismarck, North Dakota. And so he was here at that time. He taught his own courses yet, and took his course from him, week long. And you start to bring in the maybe a little more of the human aspect, and you start thinking in terms of holism. And there's a book that he talked about, was written by a gentleman named Smuts, and his book on holism. And Ellen Savory actually took that information and applied it in Africa, and started to develop his concepts and techniques. So that to me was kind of helpful to maybe broaden my thinking instead of narrowing it down more. So he made a real big impact on me in the 80s. And we brought him back to Bismarck 30 years after that. And the interesting thing, Tyrell, was that 30 years later, those that were still alive came back to the class that were in that class from various places, various states, came back, and we had like a reunion, so it was kind of neat to reconnect with people and catch up with a lot of different people. It's also where I met a lot of people that I stayed associated with ever since that class. And like the Kinney Millers of the great, to me the best grazer in North Dakota, and taught me so many things about grazing. But I met him in this class, and I met people like Black Lake Ranch with Jerry Doe, and I met him in that class. And I think you meet people at a neutral setting like that, and then I wasn't the government guy, right? I'm not in my office. I mean, we're on neutral ground. And we didn't talk about anything programmatically. We just talked about the resource.
Right.
And those are really, really refreshing conversations that I think really move you down the road. So, as time went on, I started looking more at cropping systems and diversity. And Dwayne Beck was another individual with Dakota Lakes Research Farm in Pure, South Dakota. And so spent a bit of time with him, and just in terms of just initially getting through his lectures or his workshops, and understanding them. So there's one thing to sit down and listen to it. It's another to sit down and listen and digest and apply. And so he was another individual that was very instrumental in terms of the value of diversity on the landscape and the rotational impacts, and so really was helpful in getting cropping systems on the ground. And so after that, I think probably the individual that I tapped on the shoulder for help in terms of starting to understand carbon, because I didn't. And so starting to understand carbon was Don Rykowski. He was retired at the time, ARS Morris, Minnesota. There's two really good carbon people in the U.S. at that time, and Ratan Lael, Ohio, and Don Rykowski, Minnesota. And they're both very modest, unassuming people that knew a wealth about carbon and carbon function. And I started to learn that it's one thing to acquire it, it's another to hang on to it. And, you start to move into these scenarios, and that without a green plant, this just isn't going to happen. And so we have to have green plants, and then started to look at the value of livestock on those green plants, and how I can maybe even extend a period of carbon sequestration going on, or giving off of plant exudates in terms of carbon sugar exudates. And so he was very supportive, and so turned into a lifelong friend as well, and made a huge difference. Well, then if I keep going down this road, and don't hesitate to stop me anytime, but probably another individual that was very similar in this impact was Ademir Caligari out of Brazil, and listening to him at No Till on the Plains one winter. It was in Salina yet at that time, and he's
Hmm.
talking, and uh, I recall Gabe Brown and I are sitting across the aisle from each other, and we didn't, I think my entire board was there with me, and we just kind of all split up and decided we'd pick out a concurrent session, and so I ended up in Adamir's, and across the aisle from me and the chair over was Gabe was sitting there, and we're listening to Ademir explain how he's basically in between cropping schemes in Brazil. He was using cover crops to replace carbon, and from that, the associated items that came with it. Well, by then I had some appreciation for how you would put carbon in the soil, and when he talked, the light bulbs kind of started to not just flicker, but they kind of came on a bit. And
Hmm.
I remember Gabe and I looking at each other. We didn't say anything. We just looked at each other, and we knew when we got back to North Dakota what we were going to do. And so we started the whole process. Cover crop combinations and some plot work to get started. And you have to have some failures and successes, if you will, and find out what works and what's quite reliable. And of course, what we found early on, especially during dry periods, the more plants we had growing in a community, the better the survivability and the better the plant vigor. And the monocultures struggled the most in our extreme drought period that we had. That was in 2006, and they struggled a lot, whereas the plant community that had the most diversity in it did the best. And so that was a great experience to work your way through, um, and then to do all of the bring a backhoe in and put in a 4-foot profile that you can actually examine, do all the nutritional work, send it in for forage analysis, all these things that are parts of the equation. There's never one of them that gives you a
Hmm.
total answer, how that works.
Right. Right.
It's always a process of trying to get enough information to gather to kind of see your way to the next step. So he was very helpful. So he gave us a lot of help in 2006, and then last year in 2023, I think it was, we ended up on an agenda together. And I don't think either one of us knew this was going to happen, but we did end up on the same agenda in in the UK last winter, and so it was really good to reconnect with him and see him again, and gave me gave me an opportunity to basically thank him for what he did, because he unselfish uh, shared that kind of information. And so all these different people and all these parts of the pie, if you will. And there's been so many, on the entomology end, on the insect end, Jonathan Lundgren, um, Tom Dykstra, they helped unravel things for us, helped us understand how we're looking at the insect end, helped us understand too, I think, predator-prey relationships a bit better. Maybe even looking at some tools like bricks and those type things. And so there's just a lot of people that did so much for us, and we took each one of those in time, and then myself, with my background, Tyrell, what I would do then is I would apply it initially, usually on a small basis, and
Hmm.
then monitor it. And so, I'd monitor the soils in terms of carbon, in terms of biology, all, inorganic and organic nutrient, and those type things that help you maybe see into it a little bit further, and then your landscape's unique, right? Every landscape across the nation is unique, and it all functions a little bit differently for all of us, but you find your way on that. It's the same but different. Yeah, and
Hmm.
yeah, it's the carbon cycle is the same, yeah, but it's different on how it works in different places, and all these things come into play. And so eventually, I sat down and described, did not create, but described the soil health principles. Okay. And so these were principles that I think in Gabe's book, he mentioned nature wrote them, wrote the principles, which I think they probably did. But then it's up to us to describe them and figure out how to use them. And so I sat down and described them a few times, and they got a little bit better over time. Each time I would do that, I would look back at the previous effort and I'd go, "Oh my, that was pretty sad." And because there were things that maybe 5 years later or even 10 years later, there were things that you were like, okay, I got a little bit better grasp on this part now, and so I can do a better job of describing it. So I'm in the process of redescribing them again right now.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and so I'm working with No Till Farmer magazine,
Hmm.
and so um, well, I agreed to write one every, I don't know what it is, every 2 or 3 months. I have one, and so I'm on number 4. I think I just finished up number 3, and so then I tie it to a farm, and so describe it and then tie it to a farm, and they supply me with kind of what works for them in terms of number of words, and I try to stay in their
Hmm.
parameters, and so now describe it and then a farm that would represent it. Okay.
Right.
That maybe has a pretty good grasp on a particular principle, keeping in mind they were always intended to work together. They were always intended to kind of be to me, kind of a place to start, right? So you as a conservationist, you're working with somebody. Where do I start? How do I start? Well, once the first time I wrote the principles up, granted they were really, really rough, but yet it still really helped me. When
Hmm.
I would work with an individual farm, ranch, gardener, they helped me understand where to get started, where to apply, and where to the general direction to move into. And I think that was a very helpful item in terms of because now you could go back and you could look at, okay, carbon, you could look at plant diversity, you could look at the animal impact, um, and you could look at the disturbance impacts of the physical, biological, chemical, and you started to kind of find your way on that. And so it made a huge difference as a conservationist when working directly with somebody. And of course, from the human aspect, I would go back to people in thinking in terms of what someone like maybe an Ellen Savory taught you, and I started to do a lot better job on the goals and objectives. And so if you're going to work with somebody, I have to see some kind of, I want some kind of written goal from you. What's your goal? And I think when you write it out, it doesn't have to be lengthy, but when you write out a paragraph, that's different. That's like a different thought process in your mind almost than just
Hmm.
talking about it. Because
Right.
when you
Right.
write it out, it's more of a buy-in, if you will.
Well, it's the same as the soil health principles.
Yeah.
It's you put it into words, and so then I mean, before you wrote them out, you knew it, but it was almost like I mean, as far as if you have a goal, okay, this is what we're striving for.
Yeah,
Where with the soil health principles, it's like, okay, it almost gives you like a checklist in your
yeah,
practices with the soil health principles wrote down somewhere. You go, okay, how am I addressing armor?
yeah.
Not, I got an F on armor. Okay, what about this? Or, I mean, and so it's kind of the same idea why it's been so impactful that you wrote out the like you said, you didn't discover them, you just put them into words for
You
everybody
start, you
essentially.
start, you start to describe them, and I always encouraged my counterparts, if you want to use them, and everyone should, but when you use them, describe them,
Hmm.
because you'll find yourself way more. I think you'd be more effective, and gives you direction, helps you move this thing down the road, and I think that made a huge difference. And initially, within the agency, within NRCS, we'll just talk about them for a minute. So within the agency, you're working for something, a large employer. And so it's not like you can just, one person's going to move this ship, right? You make it go left or right. Those aren't the
Right.
correct naval terms. I get that, but for a landlocked state from North Dakota, I can get away with it. And so I guess what I'm saying is, I wanted to talk to my colleagues and management within North Dakota. So I contacted them in advance of a statewide meeting, and I said I'd like a little time on the agenda. And they they got back to me and said we'll give you 5 minutes before lunch. And I said I'll take it. And so I was hoping for a little more, but I'll take what I can get. And 5 minutes before lunch, I got up in front of my colleagues and I said, I'm starting to. I said I'm not really. Um, what I'm looking at is something called soil health principles, and I said I'm working on kind of trying to get a understanding, really a description of each, and I want to start using them in conservation planning, and which is a 9-step process. And the essentially, I announced to them that I said I don't want to put my effort and time into treating symptoms. So I've treated enough. So this was me getting rid of my waterway title, and so I said this is something I don't want to spend any more time on. And I said we need to treat the problem. And I said I think the problem, no pun intended, but the problem lies in the soil. And so we needed to address this. And I said, I think we can do this, but we have to make some changes. And everyone was kind of North Dakota polite. Nobody said anything. They didn't say anything negative. They didn't say anything positive. But as I think I might have told you before, one time I did have lunch alone that day, and so it was a little
Hmm.
little different. But never looked back. Um, felt right. Felt right. And by then, I had enough time behind me where I had seen from all the different mentor type people. I had seen enough where I knew this was going to be a positive impact, and I had monitored enough to see those results. And so I was that gave me enough confidence to move forward. And
What
so,
what year was that meeting?
oh, that's a really good question. I would guess it was in the 90s. Um, I could probably get a little bit better, but I'd probably have to go back into
So
the
so
archive.
you had already been building on the, or you'd already been pursuing this knowledge, uh say different, whether it's the carbon or it's the diversity
Yeah,
or it's holistic management. I guess what was the catalyst? What was the catalyst to go down that road? Like what made you go, um, there's got to be something else out there? Or I mean, I guess
Well,
what put you down that path?
yeah, I was very frustrated. I was very frustrated from a work environment because of wind and water erosion and treating symptoms and retreating symptoms, and that I had a lot of frustration just in that we weren't improving it.
Hmm.
And so there's a difference between you're conserving something or you're rebuilding something. And so we weren't even doing a good job of conserving. And so
Hmm.
when you continue to degrade, that's not the right path. And with my work interests, I knew I was interested in the agricultural world. Academically, when I came out of college, I was going to be going into the ag finance world. And so by the mistake I made in college, I took some geology and soils classes. That was the mistake I made. My finance classes were fine, but
Gotcha. Gotcha.
those classes kind of ruined me. And so
Gotcha.
I bought into those pretty well because maybe because I grew up a bit. My dad farmed through the 30s, and as my mother and dad both, and they were products of the Great Depression. My dad was born in 11, and so he as a young man was farming through the 30s, and his guidance in life had a huge impact on me, both in terms of people, how he always addressed people, and also in terms of the environment, because he was always so careful with everything he did. And so it was fragile, and he knew that, and was always very supportive on that. And so my mother was more on the livestock end. Um, she ran the dairy. My dad ran more of the cropping enterprise, and but the two together were a good team, and grew up in a very similar environment, and so this was a very important thing, and I think that kind of gave me that start. But I was going to make loans or manage money in the ag world, um, academically. And so,
Hmm.
but then when I went down the road, I think I was frustrated from the viewpoint of we just can't seem to get a handle on this with all this bare ground, all this wind erosion, all this water erosion, and loss of carbon. And isn't there isn't there another way? Isn't there
Hmm.
something that we can do to improve this situation? And so ultimately, as you start looking at this and you start bringing this together, even reading books like David Montgomery, the author, as he put together some of his best work, I think, in terms of describing what a lot of the countries went through, and then how to, then eventually a turning around type thing. So all of that collectively, but I think a lot of it might sound strange, was just kind of frustrated with treating symptoms, and then at that point, there was a bad thing that happened to me, and that was from the viewpoint of I knew better then. I mean, I knew there was a better way, and so I had just enough information and background at that point now where I said, okay, I think I want to step into this. And the funny thing about stepping into it, I was a very reserved individual, and my goal was to never give a talk to anybody, group, never give a presentation or anything ever, because I was not interested in that. And the interesting thing that happened to me, and I can't tell you why, well, I can kind of, but all of a sudden, as we started to connect just a few basic dots, and we saw a little bit stronger scenario than I wanted to. And so I started with putting together putting together the story, I had five people on my board that were just they were just all in sync on this. So we self-educated together. Okay. So we would get together and
Mm-hmm.
take topics, different topic each month, and we would self-educate together, the team in the office and the team of farmers. And the interesting thing was then it was just so interesting to put their individual stories together. And then, of course, once you captured some of their data and photos, well, all of a sudden, then there was a PowerPoint, and then,
Mm-hmm.
there was some joint presentations or individuals were giving them as well. And so all of a sudden, it became, more of it felt more comfortable and right.
Mm-hmm.
So I went from having to wanting to.
Right.
And I think if you can get to want to,
Right.
there's always it's always a little easier road. But it was starting to formulate that, so it was over time, obviously, and but the good news about that, it always allowed enough time then for monitoring and observing, and then when you would see it on more than one farm. So I had the luxury of being on a lot of farms, and so
Mm-hmm.
I could go from farm to farm, and I could hear their story, and I could maybe take a soil sample, or take a forage sample, or all these different things, and I could start to slowly paint a picture over time. It's a
Mm-hmm.
time and effort type process. Yeah. So
Well,
summer's
well,
in there.
uh, was a holistic management course with Alan Savory, was that one of your first exposures
Yeah.
as far as seeking? Because see, when I hear that, and I mean, I know you, and the way you present things, I just think what an impact and what a way by taking that course, and you clearly understood the concept of holistic, because it has I mean, the way you've just gone about everything, you haven't went through with a very narrow view. You haven't learned through a narrow lens. You've 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 cast a wide net, I guess, as far as trying to put things together. And it's almost like you set yourself up perfectly by taking the holistic management stuff first, to then be able to take them in piece by piece and then start putting them together. And um, just how important and impactful that has been on your career, and how you've continued to share and give presentations uh,
Well, I think he
throughout.
taught, he taught me and everyone in the class, from the viewpoint of, more or less maybe from the viewpoint of science. Let's just take science. It's rarely complete. And
Right.
so I came to more learn, maybe from the viewpoint that the science of a particular topic, whatever it is, it's what we know today. And
Right.
it's probably not
Right.
going to be what we know in the future. We're
Hmm.
probably going to know more about it eventually down the road as we unravel something a bit more. So I learned to not think of it as a completed process. And so I learned to think of it more as an open-ended scenario that we can continue to learn and gain. Because in the 40 some years that I worked, how we, just take something pretty straightforward like soil organic matter. What
Hmm.
we knew in the 80s on soil organic matter compared to 2024, I mean, it's not even in the same light. I mean, it's much more extensive. We have a much greater understanding, and
Hmm.
then with that, we have to understand that that's not the end of the road either.
Right. Right.
So there's more coming, and so
Hmm.
it's I think what Ellen Savory did was give me maybe somewhat more of an appreciation for maybe the human aspect of it, but thinking of it in terms of holism, uh, it also said to me, as I learned afterwards as well, that those are science many times is what we know today, but don't limit your thinking. And so if you can keep your mind open, which I think for all of us can be always a challenge. I mean, the
Right.
human
Yep.
being typically wants to kind of boil it down to the equation and
Yeah.
get that just boiled right down. Like one of my colleagues, when we started, as an example, we started using cover crop combinations, and one of my colleagues, and we saw the impacts, right? We saw the impacts as monocultures, we saw them as polycultures. And I can remember one of my colleagues saying, now we just got to figure out how to get that polyculture down to just that one or whatever that made that impact. I said, no, I think we got to start the conversation over
Right. Right.
because
Right.
there's supporting roles in here, and we don't always see exactly why, but when we have
Right.
that kind of diversity, then things change. And so, you start going down the road, start looking at things like secondary metabolites, and which is just a huge, huge topic that I think we're going to have some growth on going forward in the future. But but talk about one that's going to have connections that are going to be so difficult to probably tease out in terms of figuring out these different aspects, but they're there.
Hmm.
And so nature is not simple. Nature is always quite complex, and nature deals with a lot of diversity, and that interconnection. We've just so one of the trying to think of the name of the individual. I think it was in Saskatchewan. Wrote such a good book on energy, and as he's describing past agriculture, he described it as kind of a circle. Okay, it was kind of a loop. We
Hmm.
recycled and recycled, and then the last 100 years or so, we got into more of a horizontal, linear, almost like a pipe. And so we put things in one end and yield or whatever, and everything else comes out of the other end. And those are two different concepts. And so then, I think when we use you bring a cover crop in with diversity, you start to curve the pipe more back into a bit of a circle. It doesn't get into a circle yet, but it's the start of
Hmm.
bending it back toward recycling. And so then there's so many items go with that, because it's not just yield that comes out of the end of that horizontal pipe. There's all of the things in terms of water quality. So we have inorganic nutrient at the end of our cropping systems, and without the cover crop, we aren't capturing that part of it. We aren't keeping it in the field, it's leaving. And so, just all these things, and then they're all kind of little parts of it, but it's how we bend the pipe back into more of a circular form. And I think that's going to be really important going forward. How do we do that? And I think that's always been one of the goals. But the foundation of my start was holism, and
Hmm.
thinking in those terms a bit more, or at least being aware of them. And I think when you're aware of them, or you're willing to recognize them, and I think too, you have to be. I failed at a lot of things, and tried to keep those small. Tried not to repeat them too terribly many times in a row. And but I think when you're looking at those kind of approaches, you failed at something. It's really helpful then to learn how to do it better the next time. And so you start to ultimately go down these roads. But that's why I found the descriptions helpful on the soil health principles, because they give you good foundations for your neck of the woods, if you will. And then you start to bring this process together. Conservation planning is what NRCS uses, and it's a good process. If there was one thing, Tyrell, that I did maybe a little differently than my colleagues, because you're always going from one programmatic sign up to another. Okay, well, each one of these contracts
Hmm.
is supposed to have a conservation plan, and should have that first. right? Because then you have all the resource concerns, you have the objectives, you have the alternatives, you have the selection of alternatives, all these items in this 9-step process. If there's one thing I maybe put more emphasis on than my colleagues was number 9, which is the last one, is evaluation. And it's an easy one to skip, if you will, or treat very lightly, if you will, because you are off to the races on the next sign up, right? You're off.
Right.
You got to get on. There's a deadline, and
Yep.
this thing has to happen. Okay, so you're off to the races. But if you skip 9, or if you treat it lightly, then you are robbing yourself of learning, because it's the evaluation of what you did, right? What you put on the ground. And
Right.
so you kind of shortchanged yourself and the client. And so if you complete the evaluation, then I think you learned what happened, cause and effect, or what happened from these actions, and the client learned.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that at the end of the day is, again, from a holism viewpoint, that's so important, because now you can tie the knot, if you will. And
Right.
otherwise you leave that open and you missed a learning opportunity.
And you've mentioned my evaluation now, and I know most farmers are probably going to be, well, I don't have time to do all these tests or to run all these tests on different things. I think I know what you're going to say, but what has been your number one go-to tool to observe and
Yeah.
measure?
Yeah. So I don't like spending money on things unless I have to. And you need something on your on the end gate of the pickup, right? You need something that you can help make a determination on. And so, I hung out with those soil scientists for a reason. And it wasn't because they were such great conversationalists, but they were good at what they did. And so I learned to use a spade, and I learned to read it. And I think there's a reluctance to do it, from a conservationist viewpoint, farmer, rancher, gardener viewpoint, because of you take this spade of soil and you look at it and go, oh, okay, but you're not really sure how to gauge it, maybe. Okay, so what I there's some simple things you can do to really make that better. So when I'd be on that farm, I would maybe get a spade of soil from that cropland field we were working on, something that represented it quite well, put it on the end gate, and then maybe go over to the fence line, maybe go over to, a pasture, maybe go over to hayland. And all of a sudden you got 3 or 4 spades of soil in a row. And all of a sudden that spade of soil from the cropland makes sense. All of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden you notice things like, wow, this doesn't feel like the one I just took out of the fence line. This soil, the fence line soil, so crumbly, right? And this other one is kind of out of the cropland here is kind of blocky and kind of hard, and it's not crumbly, and it's not as dark looking, and it doesn't have all the rip mass in it like this fence line does. And and you do that over and over and over and over again. You get better at it. It's like anything, it's repetition. But I think initially just taking one spade of soil sometime and looking at it, yeah, it's very difficult to just say this is or this isn't. But when
Right.
you can have some kind of comparison, a spade in the ground is worth so much, and it's where everything happens.
Mm-hmm.
It's where you want to look.
Right.
And then you
Right.
start seeing, then I in a way I relive it many times, because I'll look at the surface of that soil, and if you're in a bit of a degraded field, you'll see how everything is, the pores are slaked shut on the surface, and you start to see how there's no structure to that. And yeah, when it rains, you're not if it rains an inch, you're not going to get an inch in there, and so you get too much moving. And and then on the other hand, you also notice this when you have someone that's just done a great job on creating some armor on the surface and creating some structure and bringing some carbon in. Really shows, and then you know it's going in the right direction. But yeah, spade for me is really hard to beat. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
There's a
Hmm.
real simple process. ARS across the river here at Mandan Ag Research Service. Mark Liebig, soil scientist there, trained us a number of years ago in VES, visual assessment of soil structure. It's a simple, straightforward process. You can print out. It's one sheet of paper, front and back on one sheet of paper, and it's a visual and a feel, and you can give it a pretty easy rating. It's nice if somebody goes through it with you first time, but it's something you can definitely capture and do, and then you can kind of give yourself a little bit of a report card to help you know if you made a change, positive change a
Hmm.
year or two later. So
Right. Right.
things like that, but they all go hand in hand with the spade. Yeah,
Right. Right.
yeah,
If anyone wants one of those sheets, um, I'll just do a shameless plug for Kansas Soil Health Alliance, and they have a soil assessment bucket that has different sheets in there for different
sure.
tests that you can run visually, and it has a sheet where you can do a vest. Just get on their website if anyone
Right.
is looking for something. Wouldn't surprise me if South Dakota Soil Health Coalition has something similar. Um, Maybe even you
Yeah.
guys up there at Minokin, do you guys have something similar to that? That
So we use the best the straight product that was put together initially. So it's the criteria that we use. Yeah,
Yeah,
we don't have a
gotcha.
kit per se,
Okay.
but we
Okay.
use vests and we use that on our fields, and it's a great tool. Yeah, and
Yep.
again, I like something I don't have to send. I got nothing against the lab, but I like something that I can deal with that day and give me an understanding for where we're at and whoever
Hmm.
we're working with. And I think that's a pretty straightforward tool, and it goes so well with the spade, I guess is why
Right.
I
Right.
like
Yeah.
it.
Well, and and it, to get kind of back, I guess, a little bit towards your so, so much of what we know, we're just at the tip of the iceberg. It's still a lot that's open ended. Um, I heard, and you mentioned soil test. I heard Dwayne Beck mention one time that they've done all these long term rotations on their farm there at Dakota Lakes, and um, you can visually see the difference in the rotations as far as the
Mhm,
difference in the soil.
mhm,
But if you go and pull a soil test, it doesn't necessarily match up as far as um, ones that have had a good rotation that are good, healthy soils versus one that is, say, a corn and soybean rotation. He said it in a traditional soil test. And so, kind of getting back to what you say, the power of observation, the power of a spade, how powerful it actually is, even with all the science and technology that we have,
right,
um, it's it's still we're limited with all that science and all that technology.
right, right. And I think
We
I
know
think
and what
it
we've
allows
learned.
us, yeah, it allows us to use all our senses, and
Hmm.
so you are visually seeing it, but you are also feeling it, and you
Right.
are also smelling it. And
Hmm.
so if it has rather a neutral or neutral to sweet smell, you feel pretty confident that that's a pretty healthy scenario. Whereas if it's pungent,
Hmm.
that's not a healthy scenario. And these things play out, and I have nothing against any technology in the world, but none of them can tell me how it smells or how it
Right.
feels.
Right.
And I have to and I have to I want to be there. I want to hold it in my hand because then I can feel the tension in it. I can feel it if it's blocky. I can feel it if it's crumbly. I can tell that. And so if it has good friability and crumbles in my hand, it doesn't even make my hand dirty. That's really
Right.
well aggregated soil.
Right.
It's some of the best. And so
Right.
those are items that are would be missing on some of the data, if you will, that would print
Hmm.
out. I mean that's all part of the equation also. but I think when we bring the two together, it's pretty hard to beat. But so yeah, not to belabor the point, but a spade would be very difficult to as a tool to beat.
Right, right. Uh, now, because you want to speak, uh, how many countries have you presented in over the years?
Oh, I guess I kind of lost track. If I start in the US, I think NRCS wise, I think I've been in 46 states. I think there was 4 states who wouldn't have me, sent the ballot out or something. I don't know what they did. But I think I represented NRCS initially in about 46 states, 5 continents, um, and then a few countries in each continent. A lot of the European countries, um, Australia, South Africa, Argentina, and then throughout Europe in terms of I probably worked in France for USDA. I probably worked in France 4 times, and also Germany and UK and Sweden, Copenhagen, Austria, and these different places. And so when I did travel internationally, I did have kind of parameters worked out with USDA. So if you're traveling for USDA, you're traveling on a federal passport, and so it's different than going as a tourist. So
Hmm.
your itinerary, all of your information, etc., goes to the U.S. Embassy, and so you have to get through ethics in Washington D.C., and you have to have this thing signed off by everyone, or you're not going. I always liked traveling on a federal passport because there was also some security clearance in terms of safety and all these different
Right,
aspects. And so I liked the embassy of whatever country we were in, knowing we were there. I actually
right,
liked that. And so it gave me, it gave you a comfortable feeling. Some of the countries were, a bit maybe a little bit safer than others. Um, the other item that the parameters that I traveled with USDA was USDA didn't pay the bill, and so the host country would pay your costs. And so I
hmm,
thought that was fair to the taxpayer. I thought it was fair to the agency. The other parameter was that we always stayed, generally speaking, we would stay in the ag community of wherever you were working for that week. And so you would stay there, usually with a farm family. And I think that probably taught me more than anything else could have in those individual countries. Um,
right.
the Australians were always very receptive and good hospitality. I probably have to take my hats off to the South Africans. I think I worked in South Africa 3 different times, and I positively left part of myself there. I mean, it was just the relationships and everything they have going on in that country, but yet they kind of keep the country together. And so it's a fascinating place, and teaches you a lot. And I would always ask to listen to their stories from the viewpoint of
Hmm.
their ancestors, everything that's occurred over time in these different countries. And so I'll share this one with you. So it's the evening before. We're going to do a soil health workshop the next day. I think we're in Rights. I think it's called Rights, South Africa. It's a farming community. And so we're going to have a dinner that evening, and we're at a farm. And, people are just kind of talking and visiting, and we're getting ready for dinner. And the farmer, and I didn't see this coming at all. The farmer says, he says, I'll say grace. Okay. And if I would have given anything if I'd have recorded that prayer, because it was probably one of the most gripping things I've ever heard. And he just went into everything from cultural diversity to agriculture to relationships to he just brought it all together. And when he was done, I felt like I was coming out of church. I mean, it was just so impactful. And I do have a picture of it, which I've always cherished. But I wish I could have captured his comments, because he was teaching all of us in that room to have a little humility and to have an understanding of others and all these things. And I think he did a nice job of that. And so, yeah, so these are priceless experiences. And but yeah, no, they were all good. Enjoyed them all. I tried to represent the agency, tried to represent the U.S., and tried to do it in a manner that supplied their request, but also a human aspect to it. Because at the end of the day, we're
I
kind
think
of all,
go ahead.
at the end of the day, I think we all kind of are in this together. And I always saw it as a how do we make these food production systems work? How do we live on a piece of land and not ruin it?
Mm-hmm.
How do we do that? I think that was Aldo Leopold. I'm paraphrasing there, but he had some kind of quote about that greatest challenge. One of the greatest challenges there is how do you live on this piece of land? And it's kind of like, and I think Dwayne Beck always mentioned this, and I've observed it myself. When you're in Europe, the closer you get to the castle, the more degraded the land, and makes total sense. We've indirectly have done a very similar thing. Yeah.
Right. So I think you probably answered my next question. I was going to ask you what was the most interesting country, but I think you answered that with the South African answer.
Probably would go back in a heartbeat. Like I said, just some great experiences there and great people. Just the type that you're not going to forget. But they were all good. Got no regrets on any of them, and wouldn't have done it any differently. But yeah, I think South Africa is just kind of a little bit unique. Did get a chance one time also in Russia, and had a real. I think from the viewpoint of the Russians, I had a strange how they talk about out of mind or out of body or whatever experience. And so in Russia, they assigned you an agronomist months in advance, like 6 months in advance. And the agronomist would set up your because this was going to be an outside soil health workshop, and he would set up whatever you wanted set up. And so I had him do a soils pit, and I also had him do a cover crop combinations, and I wanted some monocultures. Well, you've heard the term, Tyrell, lost in translation. It's real easy to do between English and Russian, let me tell you. But the cover crops were close. Anyway, we're standing by the cover crops. Of course, you have a translator, and there's a group of Russian farmers there, and they were. You couldn't have told them, you couldn't have picked them out. You could have put them right here in Bismarck, and you couldn't have picked them out. I mean, they looked like everyone farming here. And so the interesting thing was, I'm thinking to myself, when I was in grade school, I think it was Friday afternoons, we would go through a drill, and the drill was, well, what you have to do if there's an attack, right? Cold War. Here's what's gonna, you get under your desk, because everyone knows if you're under your desk, a bomb, atomic bomb or something, that's not going to get you. You'll be okay under your desk. And radiation can't come under your desk.
That's
evidently. Right. And so you learned how to clean radiation off of water bottles or water containers, and you'd watch these little film clips, and and this was all in grade school, and I'm 70 years old, so you can kind of figure out the era. But when I was in grade school, it was like an hour or whatever once a week. And so we would do this. And so you're, working with the translator, and the translator is giving my message, and then I'm waiting for the translator. And all of a sudden, I'm back in grade school, and I'm thinking, I wonder if they realize how
We
scared,
might have lost you.
you know.
Hold on, guys. I'm gonna. Oh, okay. So we were just at radioactive fallout.
Okay, so the radioactive fallout, yes, we were had to do the drill where you got under your desk and you were safe. Well, anyway, then we're doing the workshop in Russia, and I have a Ukrainian translator, and he's talking to the farmers, and we're standing by the cover crops. And I had just kind of given the start of my, you give a sentence or two, and then the translator, relayed. And while the translator is relaying, I'm flashing back to being underneath a desk, in grade school, in the third grade or fourth grade, whatever it was. And, I had this terrible flashback, and I wondered to myself, Tyrell, I wondered, do they realize how scared we were of them? And as young kids, in grade school, because the Cold War and everything that was on, and I'm looking at these guys and I'm thinking they're just farming like we are, and we're all kind of in this together, but we have these ideological differences from time to time. But yet at the end of the day, when you get into the farming community, it's kind of the same.
Right.
We have the same resource concerns. We have the same challenges and the same frustrations, and
Hmm.
sometimes the same successes. But sometimes after it leaves the farming community, sometimes food's been used as a weapon, and so, it's
Hmm.
all these different things. Politics come into play, and but when you're in the foundation and you're going across the lines in the foundational aspect of ag communities, they had such commonality, and people were good. Yeah.
Hmm. I think when you were down here, I think we talked that you said if you would have, I mean, basically, like you said, it was almost as close as it was as far as being in North Dakota, as far as similarities, whether it was people, whether it was
Yeah.
kind of landscape, it was just
Yeah.
very eerily, almost eerily similar.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. So, and they also had mollisol soils, just like in North Dakota. And
right,
so
right,
prairie formed soils, these mollisols, when you put the spade in the ground there, it had a bit of a familiar look to me. And
right,
it was
right.
very comfortable. It felt comfortable.
Hmm.
and
Right.
and so just there was a lot of those type features, and then the physical appearance of the people. One thing I'll have to say, this few years ago now, but the Russian people where we were at looked really healthy. There was very little obesity. They
Hmm.
just they just looked very healthy. And so some of that is maybe has to do with what you do and don't have available to you. But overall, they look good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this has been great. We've, like I said, this kind of how I want it to be. I just want it to see, let the conversation go where it may. We haven't, I mean, like I said, that's what I want to do, is just capture this kind of stuff. But I guess uh we'll at least get one question in there, I guess. Where do you think we're going with agricultural chemicals? Because there's a lot of
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
of we have to get rid of them.
Yeah.
There's research that says they are causing cancer. There's some research that says that might be a little bit inclusive.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, just because it's a tool that we use, that I don't think really anyone that understands, has at least a little bit of understanding of soil function. I don't think there's a whole lot of people that want to go back to just solely relying on tillage for
Yeah.
cropping practices. I mean, so where do you see that? I mean,
That's a great question. And I think there's things come to my mind on that. So if I hadn't worked through the 80s and into the in the 80s and the mid 90s, that 15-year stretch, this country, was all tillage. And that's a very difficult environment when you're in the Great Plains states,
mhm.
because you're going to have some severe ramifications from that in terms of erosion loss, phosphorus transfer, all these different aspects that come along with wind erosion, and all the transporting of nutrient with water erosion. So there's very few things in agriculture that are 100% right or 100% wrong. It's not,
Right.
there's some that are more right than wrong or more wrong than right. So the thing that is kind of ironic about your question, when we had our planning meeting about a year ago with the Minokan Farm Group, uh, the board of directors had a request, and they said we'd like to, uh, we eliminated insecticides and fungicides at the start of the Minokan Farm in 2009, Conservation Demonstration Farm. And so that part was replaced with diversity, and really was probably even a smoother transition than I was hoping for. The herbicide end of it, so when you're talking about pesticides in general, fungicides, insecticides, herbicides. And so the herbicide end of it was still with us. Now we tried to have diversity of herbicides, and we tried to have a continual green plant to have a strong biological component to degrade them, right? You got to break them down. You're using them, and then you have to break them down. And so we tried to do that, but this was beyond that. They said we'd like to take 3 out of the 10 fields and apply no herbicide. Okay, sure, we can do
Yeah. No problem.
that. And so we did that. And the beans we haven't harvested yet, but we did a different technique with the beans. We planted them green into cereal rye, and we're not a very good crimping location because our season is, you get in the northern plains, there isn't much for length of season typically. So we have had limited success with crimping in the past. So we said, well, we're going to sickle mow it this year, and that'll allow us to do it earlier. And so we sickle mowed it. We planted them green in the standing rye, and then we sickle mowed them. And eventually, and it was fairly heavy rye production, and the beans came through this. Okay, and so I'm out there with one of my colleagues, and he said, "But there's still there's a green rye plant there, and there's one over there." And I said, "That's great because they're sending a signal to the wheat community that there's still the presence of a green plant here." So I said, "I think you want some. It's always a
Mhm.
balance, right?" So
Right.
I said, "My goal is I don't want 100% of it. I'd like some left." Okay. And so we're going to be harvesting this, and it it actually doesn't look too bad. It looks pretty good. I had a bag over my head the first, I don't know, 6, 8 weeks, but eventually it took it off. And the rye plant, the bean plants did come through this heavy material, and we were able to do it earlier than if we had to wait for crimping. Okay, so
Mhm.
we need that stemmy plant. When you flick it, it should sprinkle a little pollen, but we needed to be earlier than that, so the sickle mowing allowed us to do it earlier. And we have some additional thoughts for next year on maybe a similar field. And then we had another one where we planted buckwheat into alfalfa. So a standing alfalfa field, and we're not looking at haying this alfalfa field. That alfalfa field's role is a perpetual cover and a
Mhm.
perpetual weed suppressant. Okay. And so the buckwheat yielded 500 pounds. I don't know what an average buckwheat yield is. It's kind of a specialty crop. We have a few people that do grow it. I think it's kind of on a contract basis, though, I believe. And so we're moving in that direction. The lowest fruit one was the winter wheat. Okay, so we broadcast clover, 3 different clovers into it in April. It
Mhm.
was cold when we did it, and but those clovers took off pretty nicely because we did have some rain early on this summer, and so those clovers took off as an understory underneath the winter wheat. And so the winter wheat did have a good yield, and yeah, I walked through it several times. It was full of life, toads and frogs and ladybugs and all these different creatures that you don't always see in a wheat field. Okay,
Right.
and
Right.
and so that part gave me some encouragement as well. So we got through those 3. Well, the interesting thing was when we did our crops, covers, and cows field day, there was a lot of interest in those fields. That's
Mhm.
where the meat and potato conversations took place. Was when we
Mhm.
built the stop in those fields. And everybody likes to see something, I guess, that may or may not be a failure, but just looking at another bean field or another cornfield didn't inspire them, right?
Right.
So
Right.
but when you get to something like this where you put the farming management practices back into it, it and I'm standing there observing all this and listening to all these people talk, and people that I had seen before at our different activities, but they aren't normally going to ask a question, or all of a sudden they were kind of front and center and asking questions. And I found that so interesting. Do we need to move in that direction? I think we do. Can we move from 0 to 60? I don't know if we can, but maybe we can get from maybe we can get part way. Maybe we can get some reduction in it, and I think that alone would be huge. Uh,
Mhm.
and it's a balance, and so we're trying a couple of different techniques, trying it with a biennial, trying it with a perennial, trying it with an annual, and they all come with there's I think they all offer something, and now it's figuring it out.
Right.
But when the board met, they definitely want to take another swing at the ball. And
Right.
so,
Right.
so yeah, I
Well,
think I think I think what you're asking about, Tyrell, is probably a really significant item. It's our health, right? I mean, these are really important
mhm.
things, and I
Right.
think how to do them. We know is going to be challenging.
Right. Right.
I'd be the last person that's going to tell you you're going to be successful every time you try it, because it's going to be a bit of a learning process. And I
Well,
think, but I think we can find our way on moving that needle. How far we can move it, I don't know. But
right. Right. Well, because I mean, whether it's in North Dakota, South Dakota, Kansas, I mean, even where I'm at in Kansas, um, before guys began doing no-till and using chemicals to control weeds instead of tillage, you fall crops weren't grown
yeah,
because the moisture management,
right.
because no-till is such a powerful tool to help manage the moisture. Um, and so I mean, my thought is people don't quite know what they're asking for if we're going to go completely away from
Yeah, it's a lot
chemicals. Because
easier to,
if we go completely away,
yeah, it,
it'll take a huge transformation of production agriculture to start. I mean,
yeah,
even if we reduced them by 50%
yeah,
across the board, I mean,
yeah.
would that be spectacular? Absolutely.
I would go
We're
even,
talking transformation.
yeah, even I'd maybe go even a step more modest than that, even, and give you the same result. Even, let's just say we took out even 25, 30%. That'd be that I would give that the same grade you just gave it, something it'd be tremendous. Would it be positive for us? Well, I think it would. Positive for our environment, water
Right.
quality, all these aspects. Yeah, I think it would. And I think you're looking at a scenario there where um, you're going to have some trade-offs, right? Because
Hmm.
now you're looking at some different aspects of it. But again, there might be some, to me, is there room for reduction? I think there is. And is there room for
Right.
elimination? I think that comes at another cost. That comes at a different cost. And so you trade one thing for another sometimes. But I think you might be able to find some middle ground somewheres where we could
Hmm.
maybe have some of those reductions. One of the reasons took fungicides out right away is because without mycorrhizal fungi in your soils, there's a lot of these aspects. They don't happen. There's a
Right.
lot of soil function things that we'd like to see that they don't happen. And so, so if we can, kind of think in those terms, um, how do we bring these things out? And even introduction of cover crops is huge in terms of water quality aspects, air quality aspects, and also I think in terms of supplying enough photosynthetic energy to the biology where they can degrade a herbicide, where they can actually break it down.
Right.
And
Right. Right. Right.
so these are all things that are again part of the equation. Not an easy item. It's probably going to be one of our greater challenges going forward. So you
Right.
picked a good one, Tyrell.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, we just, it's because, like you said, people just want to be, nope, it's the Roundup and all the problems in the world, or it's the cars that are causing all the problems, or it's the cows farting that are causing all the
Yeah,
problems in the world.
yeah,
They just want to pick something and we got to get rid of it. So I mean, we need to have voices in the room, knowledgeable voices like yourself, talking to these people that are in positions, and it's a complicated issue, and it's not just as simple as, yep, we got to ban glyphosate or whatever
yeah.
whatever product we're talking. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Well, I think we can start with simple things, and some of the simple things are even herbicide diversity, is
mhm,
maybe one of the simple things. I think then after that, to me, there's some pretty straightforward foundational items. Do you have soil health principles in place? And if you
right,
have soil health principles in place, you're much more likely to be able to decompose these products. You're also much more likely to have some soil organic matter to cushion some of these impacts. And
right,
and so
right,
these are foundational items that we all benefit from. And then I think in terms of is there room in there for some reduction? I think there is. And but it also takes different thinking, different emphasis. And so something Dwayne Beck taught me, is when you don't have enough diversity in your systems, you usually, many times you'll see people make up for the lack of diversity with tillage. Because if you
mhm,
have, there's a difference between having all four crop types in a rotation, versus a corn bean rotation that has two. Okay. And so there's a lack of diversity. And with the lack of diversity, you have a lack of diversity of exudates coming into your soil. It's a process where you simplify because you're a human. Human beings kind of
yeah,
like some simplification. And so you start looking at that and you start stepping back into that arena of diversity. That's not nature. And so then along with that simplification comes an increase in usage in not just herbicides, but along with that many times in fungicides and insecticides. So for a number of years, I also did some follow-up work with the potato industry and trying to bring cover crops into the potato industry because it's probably one of our more I don't know if I want to say brutal, but probably pretty much describes it, especially in the Great Plains, because of verticillium wilt and the frequency of the potatoes. And so the more frequent the potatoes in the Great Plains, especially in the Northern Plains here, the more likely that user is to use a soil sterilant the year before potato production. And so you're going to sterilize that field, and there is no biology. And you're going to grow potatoes the next year. You know, the potato itself is not evil, but it's how we decide to go forward with the system on it. And so the cover crops started to make a big difference, and there's a number of users. I think in North Dakota and other locations, Minnesota, et cetera, started bringing cover crops in, and that can result in a reduction of some of the pesticide use as well, and give us a good potato crop. And so, yeah, all of these items, you know, it's not an easy thing, but I think there's room for some change in there, and I think we can go forward with it in a monitoring sense and see what these outcomes are, and keeping in mind it's the human, you know, it's food.
Mm-hmm.
What's more important than how we grow our food? And
Right.
so then I think something I did at our one of our last tours, when we got to each field, I would ask the group, would you eat this field? Would you eat the food from this field? Because many times in agriculture, we don't call it food.
Right.
We call it almost anything but.
Right.
And usually it's
Right.
either food directly or indirectly, right? Either
Mm-hmm.
directly or indirectly, even if it goes for energy. Usually it's going to end uh, the material that's remaining after energy extraction is going to go to a feedlot, et cetera. So directly or indirectly, it's, you know, we're going to consume that. And I've noticed the first field or two I did that on, there was a lot of hesitation and just kind of staring at me. But about the third field, they started engaging, and then we started having conversations. You know, it is food. And then how do we grow this in a manner that you would feed your own family? You would feed your own family from that field. I think that's what we need to look at.
Right. Right. Nope. Nope. Yeah. Like you said, we like it simple, and guess what? It's not
Yeah,
simple.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
uh,
I get it.
but we've been talking for a while now. Um, I guess real quick, um, what's your agenda look like for this winter? You got any events that you're attending that you're planning on
Yeah,
speaking at
I
that
do
you're able to share?
have. Yeah, I think so. So I'm going to be at Acres USA in Madison in first week in December, and so I'm going to take a swing at the ball at their event. And they were at the Minokan farm the last couple summers, and we kind of established a bit of a relationship. And Madison, Wisconsin in December. Then I think it's in Pennsylvania No-Till Alliance the following month. Um, so we'll take a look at Pennsylvania, a couple locations in Pennsylvania. And so just finished up one in Montana a few weeks ago. And so I pick a few out, you know, that try to balance out with life. And so I work part-time yet at the Minokan farm, helping host groups. And sometimes I do a little part-time work for the Grazing Coalition as well. And as I always tell my wife, Kathy, I said, if there's some crappy job that nobody else is willing to do, I think, yeah, sure, I can do that one for you. And so those type things kind of keep you busy. But yeah, so I got a couple of them coming up. And then I also have one in Minnesota directly. Again, it's right after the Madison, Wisconsin one, so it's in southern Minnesota. I'm going to do one there as well. So a few that are coming up. Oh, I guess I got one in Saskatchewan this winter also. So yeah, a few different locations, and just, you know, enough to kind of keep you engaged and reconnect with some people and share a little bit of information.
Yep. Yep. Keeps you keeps you young, right?
Well, I think so. I think it's really important, and you know, you find this out as you get older. But you know, I think you want to stay physically and mentally engaged, exercised to a degree, if you will, if you want to use that term, but something that keeps you mentally thinking and something that keeps you physically active as well. And so I try to do both of those things, and I think that makes for uh, you know, my old friend at Black Lake Ranch, Jerry Doan, we have a pack. And the pack is we're going to tell each other, because we're about the same age, we're going to tell each other when either one of us is becoming the bitter old man. And so neither one of us want to become the bitter old man. So the pact is the other one will tell us, you know, when this is occurring so we can pull out of it, you know.
Gotcha. That's
Good
good.
luck.
That's good. You got someone there to keep you on the straight and narrow. But I think you might need more luck than he's going to need to
Yeah.
keep you. So
Yeah, it's probably not fair.
no, probably. I think yeah, you might have got the raw end of the deal there. So, but so no. Well, with that,
Well, it's good
guys,
visiting
for
with you.
watching.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't feel like I don't feel like even been talking, but we've been going for an hour and a half, I think. So, like I said, it was good. It was good. Always appreciate it. We'll wrap this up real quick. So thanks for watching, guys. Hit that like button. Leave a question, leave a comment. Jay, if anybody ever has any questions for you, where can they get a hold of you at?
So Minokan Farm is a good place to get a hold of me. Uh,
Hold
um,
on. We got crappy internet connection again.
okay.
Repeat your email one more time. I think it's internet's way of trying to say don't give it out, don't give it out.
So our website at Minokan Farm is a good place to contact me, minokanfarm.com. And you can contact me through that website. Those get relayed onto me is one option. And then, you know, too, if somebody is interested in a cell number, I would be, you know, willing to give that out to that person also if we decide to strike up a conversation. Yeah.
Yep. I can confirm that he will give it out. He might reread it later, but he will give it to you. So don't no one hesitate to get a hold of him. He's a wealth of knowledge, and look up humble in the dictionary. It'll say CJ Fuhrer. So
Yeah, yeah, no.
um,
It's been a great ride. Wouldn't have traded it for anything, Tyrell.
yeah, nope. Like I said, it's always great to catch up with you guys. So like I said, I'll get this posted up as soon as I can. I'm gonna shut this recording down. And again, thanks you guys if you made it to the end.